Welcome class to Chapter 3, Introducing Lists. For Chapter 3, I'm going to create two separate videos. In this video, we will cover the first three objectives: what is a list, accessing elements in a list, changing, adding, and removing elements, and in the second video, we'll cover the last two objectives. So what is a list to begin with? Well, a list is a collection of items in a particular order. In Chapter 2, we talked about variables and we assigned something to that variable. Think of a list as just multiple values that are assigned to a variable. So in our example here, we have bicycles equal Trek, Cannondale, Redline, and Specialized. So there's four separate values that are assigned to bicycles. In other languages, a list is referred to as an array. So I'm going to open this up in Sublime, and I'm going to go ahead and run it so that you can see that when we print a list out, we also get the square brackets as our output. So here is our output, and that was displayed as well on the PowerPoint slide. So how do we access individual elements in a list? Well, a list is numbered from 0 and on. So the first value is going to have the value of 0. The second value will be the value or the index number of 1. Red line is our third value, but is our index value of 2. And specialized is our fourth value, or our index value of 3. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. And that's how most programming languages work with indexing multiple values, in this case called a list. So if we want to just get the first value, we'll say print bicycle 0. So let's go ahead and do that in Sublime. We'll just add our square brackets in here and our index number. And we get Trek. Notice that the square brackets are now missing from the output because we're grabbing the individual value of that index number in our list. We can further add methods to it, such as title that we used in Chapter 2. Okay, so we have it capitalized. If we wanted, we could do upper. All those methods that you worked with in Chapter 2. So a list, again, is a collection of items in a particular order. Okay. Now these values inside the list, they can be anything that you want them to be. They don't have to be a series of strings. They could be a string and then a number, a Boolean value. So they don't have to be the same data type. Index positions start at 0, not 1, as I indicated before. Python considers the first item in a list to be at position 0, so this is item 1 or value 1, and then value 2 would be position 1, and so on down the line. So in this case, we can do a couple print statements. So if I do 2, I should get red line. So now I have Trek and red line. If I want the last item in the list, and I don't know how many index values there are, I can go ahead and use a -1 to bring that in. So let's go with -1, and maybe we change that to lower just to make it different. And there is our last value in our list. Using individual values from a list, so if I want to say bring this into a string, creating some nice output, I go back to what I learned in Chapter 2 with F strings, and just as we did in Chapter 2 with variable names, we enclose them in curly braces, and in this case we bring in our index number, our first item, and then we're using the title method. So let's go ahead and build this in here. Actually, we're doing a new variable called message, And so there we have our output. I think I'm missing a period here. There we go. Now I have my period in my output. All right, so let's look at our first try it yourself lab that is assigned on page 36. So 3-2 greetings. Start with the list you used in exercise 3.1. So we have to jump up. So 3.1 says store the names of a few of your friends in a list called names. Print each person's name by accessing each element in the list one at a time. So create names, assign some names to that, and then go ahead and print name 0, name 1, and so on. And you can format it using F strings, or if you want multiple print statements, you could have that. And that would be 3-1, and that one's not assigned for grade. But so we start with 3-1, but instead of just printing each person's name, print a message to them. The text of each message should be the same, but each message should be personalized with the person's name. Now, it says each message needs to be the same. If you want to go ahead and make those messages different, you can. Or maybe you want the message to be the same, you store that in a variable, and then use F strings to kind of blend the two together. Okay, so that's 3-2 lab. Changing, adding, and removing elements in our lists. So most lists you create will be dynamic. So we're about a chapter away before we go into our project Alien Invasion. So for example, with Alien Invasion, we could think of a player shooting aliens on the screen, and we would need to maybe store the initial set of how many aliens are on the screen in a list. And then as the user or the player starts to shoot those away, we have to go ahead and remove them from the list. And then maybe as they get a new screen, then we repopulate that list again. So that's just an example of how you would go about and why you would want to be able to add, change, and remove elements from a list. And there's many more examples that we could go into. So this list is a list of motorcycles, Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki. And then we go ahead and actually change the value of the first item in the list. So we're using the first item of 0, and we're changing the value to Ducati, if I'm seeing that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. So let's go ahead and create that. And so I'm going to go ahead and save this. I think I might have a motorcycles built here. Yeah, a big one. Okay. So we'll go ahead and we have motorcycles, and we're going to go ahead and print that out. And now we're going to update, again, the first value. And then we'll go ahead and print out motorcycles again. So the first list has our initial list of Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki, and then we reassign the value by using our index of 0 for the first item and give it the value of something different. So that's changing. Now how do we add? Well, we use the method called append to go ahead and add to the very end of the list. So we start out here with our 3 values. We print out those 3 values, and then we append, so we're adding one on, and then we go ahead and print that list out again. So we have, we'll go ahead instead here. And there we go. So that example is on page 37. So the beauty of the append method is that we could start out with a list that's completely empty. So just imagine maybe a user's coming to a website and now they're starting to create accounts, or maybe a user is creating a list within a website, and so we can use append as they create their list. We can go ahead and add that. So having empty lists is very common, as well as having a full list where we're moving stuff off of it as well. So to create an empty list, we just start with an empty set of square brackets. And then we go ahead and we start to append. So we use our append statement. And then we just go ahead and change our values to whatever they need to be. Keep hitting the wrong key there. And so now we have an empty list now appended with 3 different items. And so that is your append method. Inserting elements into a list. So we can insert wherever we need to insert. So in this example, we're going to insert at 0, okay, which happens to be the first, and we're going to insert the value of Ducati. So let's go ahead and come back here. I'm just going to see if I can get back to my old version. Okay, so we're starting there, and instead of, we've got insert, we start position 0, and we insert the value at the very beginning. So I'm going to keep the print statements the same just so that you can see the difference in the two. Now what if we change this to value 1? We'll see that that is right at the index of 1. So it's not like it's after 1 or before 1, it's actually at that index value, which is really nice as far as remembering how it functions. How do we remove elements from a list? We remove an element by its position. So we can use the delete statement, and it's DEL, and you just provide the name of the list along with the index number in our square brackets. So if we wanted to go ahead and then remove one of these values off, I'll go ahead and just recreate that, kind of expanding on what's in the book, but let's go ahead and delete motorcycles, and let's delete the value Yamaha, which would happen to be in our last list 2. Okay, and let's just see if that actually happened the way that I thought it out in my head. Okay, so the last list item is missing Yamaha because that was index of 2. Removing an item using the pop method. So we can remove the item using the pop method, and then you can work with that item. So if I pop it off the list, I can then store it in another variable and continue to work with it. So in this example, we have our 3 values in our list motorcycles. We print that list out, and then we pop. And pop pops it off the end of the list. And so that is stored in their popped motorcycle, and then we print out motorcycles, which happens to be Honda and Yamaha, and then we print out the value that was stored in popped motorcycle. So let's see if I have, nope, I gotta go ahead and type this one. So Honda, Yamaha, print motorcycles. So a new variable called popped motorcycles, popping the last item in the list by default. So this is the top of page 40. Okay, and those are our results. Again, 3 items, pop the last item off, stored it in a variable, and printed out that variable name. So how might our pop method be useful? So imagine that the motorcycle and the lists are stored in chronological order and according to when we own them. If that is the case, we can then use the pop method to print a statement about the last motorcycle we bought. So you can think about a lot of things that might be stored in chronological order. It might be in a game environment where something is used last and it's popped off. There's multiple ways that we can think about how we would pop stuff off the last item in the list. So we could use print statements to make that more meaningful too. Popping items from any position in the list. So maybe we wanted to pop the very first item in our list. Okay, we can go pop and then give it the index number. And so then this would come back with the value of Honda. And again, title was added here, and that's why it's got a capital H. So when do we use pop and when do we use delete? Okay, so when you no longer want to use that element that was stored in the list, or use that item that was stored in the list, you use DEL. When when you want to use that element after you remove it, that's when you use the pop method. So really determines if you need to use it or if you no longer need it. So that ends the end of this video. And so let's talk about our last 3 labs for this section, and there'll be more for the other ones. But 3-4 on page 42 is guest list. So if you could invite anyone living or deceased to dinner, who would you invite? Make a list that includes at least 3 people you'd like to invite to dinner. Then use your list to print a message to each person inviting them to dinner. Okay, so if you want to individualize those 3 messages, great. If not, you can use the same message and use your F strings to bring it all together. Then 3-6 builds on 3-4. You just found a bigger dinner table, so now more space is available. Think of 3 more guests you invite to dinner. So starting with 3-4, add a print call to the end of the program informing people that you found a bigger dinner table. Okay, so you have your 3 names. You've said your 3 messages to them. Now you're going to say, I now found a bigger table. I can invite more people to my dinner table. And then you're going to use insert to add 1 new guest to the beginning of your list, and use insert to add 1 new guest to the middle of your list, and append to add 1 new guest to the end of your list. Okay, so I'll be looking for those 3 as I grade that, and then print a new set of invitation messages, 1 for each person in your list. Then in 3-7, shrinking guest list. You've just found out that your new dinner table won't arrive in time for dinner, and you have space for only 2 of the guests. So start with 3-6, add a new line that prints, sorry, I can only invite 2 people to dinner, for example, and then use pop to remove guests. From your list. Okay. Print a message to that person letting them know how sorry you are that you can't invite them to dinner. Okay, so pop, you can use it to remove a person at the very end of the list, or you can pop it off in certain positions. And then print a message to each of the 2 people still on your list, letting them know that they're still invited. And then use delete to remove the last 2 names from your list so you have an empty list. So don't be too concerned about when I can see what these messages are at, because I will be looking at the details of your program, and I will be running it to make sure that it comes out correctly. So it says at the last bullet there, print your list to make sure you actually have emptied that list at the end of your program. Okay, so that is again the end of the first video for Chapter 3 with working with lists, and then we will talk about organizing a list, and what was the other objective? I hope I don't have them here. Oh, it's all right over here. Organizing a list and then avoiding index errors when working with lists in our second video. Thank you for your time.